I mean, when you've talked about the kind of approach or the questions, I mean, that's that the cultural studies asked. I remember you talking about how Marxism was central to it, not as this is doing Marxist analysis, but a conversation with, against,
Yes.
talking to Marxism,
Yes.
shouting at Marxism, and that has gone. That very people don't really read Marx anymore.
No, that has gone. That has gone.
How important do you think that is? That even not that a Marxist approach is no longer there, but that conversation about those kinds of questions is no longer, for example, what gives the frame to the constitutive analysis of culture. That without that, you end up in kind of a free-floating idealist world of culture where it's constitutive but not driven by anything.
Yes, I mean, I would say that I would put my weight on your second emphasis. Yeah? It's not that Marxism is not around, but that kind of conversation which cultural studies conducted with, against some aspects of, around the questions, expanding a Marxist tradition of critical thinking, that is absent, and that is a real weakness. So that's one of the reasons why I would say we're not in a very good position. I don't myself regard as the whole of the period between the sort of weakening of that tradition, which I suppose happens by the end of the 70s, early 80s, and now as completely lost. I think important gains were made which enable us to understand culture, cultural discourse, the place, the relationship of the ideological to the cultural. I don't think they're related, but not the same things exactly. So I think a lot of ground was covered, kind of conceptual ground was covered, which could go to enrich the position, provided the basic conversation was re-engaged. But if it's not re-engaged, then that interim period, cultural studies lost its way and won't find it again.
Yeah, I've always been, just in the work that I've done, I don't know if you remember the book that I did with Justin on the Cosby Show.
Yes.
But I actually don't think there's any audience work that's been done since then that has engaged, for example, questions of ideology in the same way. And that actually what I see is, there's lots of work that's been done on audiences, but it has now gone towards fan studies rather than engaging those central questions.
No, I would agree with that. That's one of the missing dimensions. Yes, the critique of ideology is rather reductive. Was taken too far. It's a loss of real important elements. You see, I would say, for instance, that it's the articulation between let me put it this way: that you can't define culture and cultural developments solely in terms of being driven by a kind of economic frame. But you have to look at the articulation between culture and, for instance, economic interests. Somebody has an interest in the shape, ownership of, control of the media. It's not the only way in which power intervenes in the media, I'd say, to make the point. Therefore, some of the work that has gone on discourse and the nature of discourse really enlarges and expands our attention and understanding of how exactly ideology works. So you could take that bit forward, but still you would have to come back and engage with those points at which culture and political interests or class interests or social interests interlock. So I don't want to return to something, but I want to re-engage the same kinds of issues. I would put it, rather differently. In the beginning, I always thought that culture was, not a autonomous sphere of its own, and that what cultural studies was trying to do was to understand the ensemble of relations between the economic, the political, the cultural, the ideological, and the social. So I don't think that it was ever intended that culture would, arise, as it did sort of in the 90s, out of this as a sort of spectre of its own, autonomous generative power. That was never intended, wasn't what it was about. So we have to go back to those early questions of how do you think the relationship between culture and ideology and class, culture and ideology and power, culture and ideology and other spheres of social life, including some that we didn't look at: education, gender, race. So the enterprise is incomplete. But unless the initial sort of impetus to make that the central focus of critical thinking, it won't hit its target.